Okay, thank you for waiting. So hey everyone, my name is Alan, developer advocate at JP Morgan, and today we're just here to talk about payments in the game industry, right? So a little bit before we get started, I want to introduce myself. Maybe I met a couple of you guys here, but just a recap. My name is Alan, developer advocate. I used to be a software engineer building full stack apps at agencies, startups, and I fell into DevRel at a startup, essentially, writing how-to guides, making videos for clients, just like essentially teaching them how to use the product, right? We got acquired by Twitter, and then I really got into my DevRel shoes, doing public speaking engagements on Twitter Spaces, live coding on Twitch, and I kind of fell into payments during my time there. I collaborated with some folks at Stripe, and that's when I was like, oh yeah, payments is actually pretty cool. How do developers monetize their apps? And fast forward a couple of months, I saw that JP Morgan was building this developer program, and I was like, what the heck is this? I didn't even know JP Morgan had APIs to begin with, right? So yeah, just a little bit about myself. I'm going to pass it over to my co-presenter here, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. So yeah, I'm more than the guy awkwardly standing on stage next to Alan. I actually am going to speak here too. So I'm Ben Stoner. I'm the global product lead for gaming at JP Morgan. Something that's pretty new for the firm is having an industry focus, and so I'm part of the team that is focused on making the payments experience for gaming, for video games, the best it could possibly be. So including developers, publishers, and of course the players. As someone who plays probably too many games myself, so what we're going to talk here about today is kind of the payments landscape within video games. Some of the trends that are kind of coming down the pipe, and what the impacts might be for folks who are working with payments and with gaming and with games, and then kind of talk through practically what that looks like. So getting right into it, today's payment landscape, right? You mostly have payments going through what you might call like platform native payment choices, right? So on PC, if you're developing for PC, chances are you're going through Steam. On console, you're going through the big three. You're going through Sony, you're going through Microsoft, you're going through Nintendo. And then on mobile, you're going through Apple, you're going through Google, aka Alphabet. and you're going through whatever they're providing for their payments, right? You're using App Store, Google's Apple SDK, you're going through Apple's SDK for mobile, you're going through Google's SDK for mobile, you're going through their payments, you're paying 15, 30% for every transaction your players are making. Or there's a chance that you're using alternative payment methods, right? You might be using Xsolla if you're developing for for Asia, you might be using Razer Gold, or you might be using like a Stripe, Adyen, or JP Morgan payments. Which I'm sure everyone in here is, right? You raise your hands. That's okay. So, the way that that's trending, right? You have the Epic v. Apple suit from a few years ago, which of course Apple won the majority of that. Some of that did come down in developers' favors. That, for example, the mobile platforms can no longer completely claim all of the customer or player relationships that you have that come out of their system. Now you can communicate with your user base directly. And then you have Epic v. Google, which a jury determined that Google was being anti-competitive in December. Of course, it'll take years of appeals before we know exactly what that does. And then you have also the US government, right, bringing their antitrust suit against Apple for a number of things, but including their app ecosystem. Across the pond in Europe, the Digital Markets Act is going into effect this year, and you're already starting to see some of these platforms change their policies for payments, for distribution accordingly, right? So there's this continued trend that could unfold in a few ways, right? The first of which is that some of these platforms are very, very good at what they do. They may find a way to satisfy coming regulatory, legal changes in a way that doesn't really disrupt the payments or distribution landscape. Scenario 2 is where the payments landscape does change a bit, but maybe distribution stays the same. People are still going through, the App Store, going through Google Play, but maybe the payments are coming through something else. And then the third scenario is that both payments and distribution ended up getting disrupted, right? Where there's been a lot of change in this space. So could go one of these ways. Seems most likely that it's going to be the scenario 2 because distribution is so powerful. It's why, Steam has held on to PC for so long despite not also having a hardware advantage, right? And so what we want to really talk through here today is, all right, well, given that things are changing and may continue to change, what are some things that game developers might be good for you to know about payments, to know in greater detail, some other considerations? And so we're going to get into that, and I'll toss it back over to Alan to start bringing us through.
Awesome. So how many people here are actually familiar with just like the payment process? Raise your hands, cool. So this slide probably doesn't mean anything to y'all. But like what goes on behind the scenes, right? So let's say your player is playing your game and wants to buy something, buy a skin, buy some gems, buy something, right? So they click that button, buys whatever. And so their payment information goes to the merchant, so your business. And they have a payment processor that processes these, sends that data to their acquiring bank, so like your business's bank. So it could be like JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, right? You get the idea. And then they send that payment data to, let's say, a card network, for in this case, like credit card transaction. So then credit card networks would be like Visa, MasterCard, Amex, that sort of stuff. So then they send that transaction data to the issuing bank, which is the player's bank of choice, Chase, Wells, Bank of America, you get the idea. And then they check if this person has the funds to pay for these transactions. So if you ever swipe your card, pay for something, and you immediately check your statement, you see this pending charge. That's essentially what's going on here. And then when it's authorized, it goes back to the merchant, and then they get the items, right? Now, that sounds like a lot of steps here, and it kind of is, but this happens like within seconds, right? So immediate satisfaction for your players. But the thing is, for each of these steps, there's certain fees involved. It's kind of a little bit like a toll road. So once the payment is in transit, for each checkpoint of the toll, you're paying something for it. So if you're going with the traditional native payments with like Google, Steam Wallet, these fees are like what, 15, 30%, versus if the opportunity for developers and publishers go with these alternative payments, how are you saving here, right? So there's still like some one-stop kind of shop integrations like your Stripes, like your Adyen's. And going with them, it's like, okay, the fees are automatically reduced, right? But if you do go even deeper and you can really optimize at each individual step itself to really maximize your profits per transaction. And when you do, let's say you like at 3% of the transaction fee versus native payments like 15-30%. You're already saving a lot here, and with that you're saving on transaction fees. How can your players benefit as well? So maybe you restructure your payment models. You have less fees that you're paying out. Maybe the players can get like reduced costs on these skins, on these gems. So it's a win-win for everyone. Less payment on the customers maybe leads to more transactions for you, right? So essentially, we want to let you know that you are going to be able to, when these changes happen, and you are looking for alternative payments, you're going to be, and if you do your homework and really like nail down like how you can optimize per step, you can experience like less fees in general. But the bottom line is, I lost you guys, we want you to accept the most legitimate transactions at the lowest cost, essentially. Right? When I say, and I emphasize the legitimate part, because if we open up the floodgates for all transactions, some bad actors can come. So when I talk about bad actors, I'm talking about fraud in general, right? And fraud is just bad for everyone. It's bad for the business, it's bad for the payment processors, networks, card networks as well. And what kind of fraud is there? Credit card fraud is probably number one. There's friendly fraud. So if people are unaware, friendly fraud is like when little Timmy here is playing with their mom's phone, does all these transactions, and when mom finds out at the end of the month, like, what the heck are all these charges? So they dispute it, right? So that's what friendly fraud is. And what happens when you get disputes? Refunds, chargeback fees. That's a big no-no. And sorry, I wish I had some water. So chargeback fees, refunds, and then refund fees as well. So when you actually get hit with chargebacks, a couple things can happen here. The increase, okay, so your payment processor sees like, oh, thanks, Jordan. Oh, so nice. Sorry. So there's, as I was saying, chargeback fees. Okay, so when you're hit with X amount of chargeback fees per like the overall transactions, so there's like a golden ratio here. Like you want to be under this certain percentage of chargebacks. So if you are, you're in the clear. But if you're over it, that's going to impact you, right? So I mentioned optimizing fees. This is the opposite of that. So if you are over this threshold of chargebacks, you're going to be, the processors are probably going to increase your fees because you're going to be deemed as a risk, right? So, and also, card networks are probably going to increase your fees as well. So it's going to be the opposite of, optimizing costs. So a big thing, financial loss. You're just losing money at that point, right? And when all these transactions goes through, even if they're, so if you open the floodgates and allow non-legitimate transactions, that whole flow, that whole road, you're still going to be charged for it, even if it gets declined. So that's a big, that sucks for everyone. It sucks for the business as well. And what else happens? Reputational damage. How does that impact your players, right? So there's other attacks like man in the middle, data breaches. I'm sure all devs here know about this. When your players are, charging, buying stuff, and then they notice like, hey, what is this extra charge here? Like, I've only been using this card on this game. Is there like something going on with like the storage of payment data, or is something else going on, right? So more and more people are probably going to notice this. They're probably going to talk on forums like, hey, did anyone else experience this? Then everyone's going to be like, yeah, I did. Then you're going to lose your player trust, right? No one's going to want to play your game. No one's going to want to buy from your game because there's this thing going on. People are stealing your credit cards. And then operational burden. What does that mean? So let's say you are over that threshold of chargebacks. The worst case scenario in that case, your payment processor actually just drops you altogether. And what do you have to do next? You're probably going to need to look for a way to demonetize. So another payment processor that actually takes on high-risk clients, but that comes at a cost. And then you're going to probably take the developer resources to build on these fraud tools with whatever methods that they have, and then not not develop on the game in general. So players are going to lose content. That sucks. And then again, that kind of just goes back into the financial loss. No one's going to play your game. It just sucks for everyone, right? So how do we approach fraud? How do we mitigate it? It's going to be a multi-layer approach here. So imagine a transaction like a knight in shining armor. So this knight is not going to go into battle, fight this dragon, whatever, without being covered from head to toe with armor, like helmet, breastplate, shield, boots, or sabatons, whatever. So it's like the same thing with this approach for transactions as well. You want to be protected before the payment, during the transmission of the payment data, and afterwards, so like storing it. So what kind of tools are there available? So before the payment data, you can actually like front load all these different tools, right? So yeah, look for tools like fraud checking, payment verification, encryption, and tokenization, and just a bunch of other validation services that's going to be available to you. So look out for these type of tools, right, to protect yourself. So before the payment, fraud check if the person who's making the transaction is who they say they are. If, let's say, I live in Texas now, and somehow the fraud check goes through and says the device who's making this transaction is like somewhere overseas. That's going to come back as a pretty red flag, right? So when that happens, you can just stop it right there before the transaction even happens. So that protects you from folks testing you, folks probing with the whole card testing thing. And then payment verification is kind of the same thing. Validates like the person is who they say they are, right? Tokenization, I don't know if anyone is familiar with this, but essentially it takes the card number itself, spins up a secure token, and then you can use that token instead of the actual number itself. So in transit, so there is a man-in-the-middle attack. If they take that, they can't really do anything with the token, right? And then you can actually double protect yourself with the encryption portion. So you can tokenize the number, encrypt it, and then send the payment itself. So it's encrypted, it's tokenized. What is a fraudster going to do with this encrypted token? Not much. So honestly, that just stops credit card fraud and card testing. And then storing the token, again, fraudsters can't really do much with that. So again, you're pretty much covered from head to toe, from before the payment to storing the payment. So that is our multi-layer approach, how you can protect yourself. Let's do a little bit of a demo. Okay. So I have this API showcase here. Online payments API. So this is your baseline transaction, right? This is like the end goal. You want to, again, process this payment somehow. But this is just the baseline of it, right? So again, we can try this out, play around with it, review, submit, and then we have a payment posted. So that's going to go through that cycle of transaction, and then eventually your player gets something. But then again, that's not really protecting anything. There's no fraud tools here. So what does the fraud tools actually look like? So I mentioned a couple tools here. This is all copy and pasted from our API reference. So before the transaction happens, we can actually do a fraud score check, right? Fraud check essentially is a post request to our /fraud check API. And we have all these required fields here, request ID, merchant ID. This is all fake data, by the way. Again, these are required amounts here, your currency, account information, account holder information, the billing address, Essentially, what this will return is a score on if it's suspect or not. So it's like if it's approved, declined, needs review. So this is going to be like the front end or front defense. So again, like I mentioned, if there's a I'm making I live in California, Texas, and there's a transaction going on in somewhere overseas, that digital fingerprint is going to be like, hey, that doesn't really match up. So it's just kind of like, it probably is going to get declined and just stops it right there. So we don't even move forward to the transaction. So you can handle it however you want on the front end, display to your customers. But if we do go in past that, I should put this in order. We can go move on to the verifying payment. Again, this stuff is going to be just a basic checkout form. Whatever information that your customer is entering is just going to go into the parameters itself. And then again, it'll verify the payment, and if that gets a green light, they can move on to provisioning a token. And then again, same kind of information from the checkout, but then we're just plugging into a different API essentially. And then when we get this token, we can then do the transaction itself. So replace that card number with the token itself, and then you're protected. I can't really show the encryption portion just because it's a file that you have on the front end, and it just like encrypts it in the browser. And then when you hit submit, it sends the data to whatever payment processor, like whatever acquiring bank, right? And then you're just protected here. And again, because it's tokenized, when you pretty much want the player to like store this payment information. So you can do like recurring payments or just like one-click payments. Better experience for them. And again, with the tokenized card number, you can actually do this entire flow again, but instead this time you replace the card numbers with the token, and it'll again do the same exact thing. So that's pretty neat. I just found that out the other day. But yeah, that's pretty much how you can mitigate fraud.
All right, thank you, Alan. So we've talked about the payments ecosystem within gaming today, some trends of where it's going. Alan's kind of walked us through some specifics about how payments work, how we can protect ourselves from fraud, which is one of the more important things for us. And now I kind of want to bring it back to the way that we, within JP Morgan, and especially with our gaming group, envision how payments can work for video gaming, right? We believe there's a lot of value that can be unlocked for the players, as well as developers and publishers when the payments lifecycle is considered from start to end, right? So in talking through how we accept payments, manage that money once it comes in, and then send it out on the back end, there's a few things that we consider, right? So we want to accept funds to allow players to pay in whatever form they choose. We want to make sure that we manage those funds so that we are maximizing our global liquidity. So that's, whether you're here in the US or whether you, let's say, have an account here and in Europe for whatever reason, and you want to be able to have access to your funds in the region where you need them. And then there's sending, right, which is maybe less of a need for some smaller games, but if any of you are working on games at scale or on platforms supporting games at scale, then this may be something that is more important to you, right? So for example, Roblox last year paid out over $700 million to developers, to third-party developers who are making content for their game. Like that's an application of where the sending comes in, right? So the ways that you would want to accept that or accept the payments might be most commonly like merchant acquiring, card acquiring, taking in a credit card, taking a debit card from your end customers. There are also many other emerging payment methods. Things like pay by bank, real-time payments, different things that are nice to have that support. And on the management side, I talked about the accounts. You might have something here in the US, maybe something in Europe, and maybe you also need to switch currencies. Maybe you need to do some foreign exchange. And there's a lot more consideration in this bucket if it's a larger company, maybe a more complex corporate structure. But all of this, is to say that with the way that things are changing, it opens up more opportunities within this payment lifecycle to really optimize what your money can do for you. So a lot of people don't know this, but JP Morgan actually backs a lot of the world's payments. $10 trillion a day, and that's not an exaggeration, is the level at which we're talking about here, right? So a lot of maybe the biggest companies in the world, you can imagine at that scale, are going through us, right? And so we look to bring that to more folks and enrich more lives that way. So what does it actually mean to you, right? There's a lot of things that we're talking about. So I'm going to use a more practical example. Now, to be very clear, and especially if you talk to any of our lawyers, this is all very hypothetical. These are not real numbers. This does not reflect JP Morgan pricing. Let me read this disclaimer line for line. These figures are hypothetical for demonstration purposes only and do not represent JP Morgan pricing. All right, now we're through that. Thank you. All right, now let's talk numbers. So, there's a lot of stuff up here. I'll walk through it piece by piece, right? So what looking at the end-to-end solutions and what kind of value it might unlock, let's take, for example, a game that does $2 million in in-game purchases in a year, right? And let's look at it through two of these hypothetical scenarios. The first is that 100% of those payments are through native payment providers, right? Let's say the first, $1 million is at 15%, and then past that it's 30%. Your blended cost is 22.5%. They're taking 30 to 45 days to actually send those funds to you. So during that time frame, that money is not doing anything for you. You can't use it. You can't earn interest on it. Then months 2 through 12, let's say, again, just to simplify the scenario, you're just parking this in an account and gaining interest on it. Let's say at 3%. And then your tax benefits are 0%. You know what this means? I will tell you shortly. But at the end of that year, for those $2 million in player payments, you're coming out of it with $1.85 million. Now let's talk through scenario 2, where we really appreciate that native platform's distribution. We don't want to fully get away from their payments because that's helpful. But let's say 30% of our payments are now going through one of these alternative payment providers, right? And as a result, our blended cost for actually accepting the player payments is much lower. It's 15%. Now, for the 30% of the $2 million that's coming through this alternative provider, instead of waiting 30 to 45 days to get your money, you're getting it immediately. And again, in this scenario, we're just leaving all the funds in an account. You're gaining, let's say, 3% on that first month that you weren't getting before. And then you have, to keep things even, 3%, for the rest of the year, and that's fine. So the tax benefits thing is interesting, where when you are working with the same provider who's maybe providing payments and also providing you with your bank account that you're getting interest on, it changes the way that you can look at the interest that you're gaining, right? So otherwise your interest may be additional income that you're taxed on. But when it's through the same provider, you can take that interest that you're gaining and use it to offset your fees. So now, right, let's say if you could offset 1.5% of your payment cost with the interest, well, now you're not being taxed on that difference because you're just lowering your costs. You're not actually seeing that as revenue coming in. So now you have an extra 1.5 on your bottom line that's just coming to you just from the way that you have things structured. And then at the end of that 12 months, this is in this hypothetical, theoretical example, you are, $220K up on that same $2 million just from having structured things the right way. So that's what we say, that there's this, end-to-end solutions that can potentially provide greater value. This is one of those examples and something that we hypothetically see occasionally. So, that's this piece, and I hope this made sense. We're around after this, and I see a hand up. We got a microphone coming to you.
When you have 70-30 split, are users going to see two payments of their credit card or just one payment?
From the player's end, they're just paying. They don't necessarily know the difference depending on how you'd set that up. I'll give you an example. Does anybody else here play Ragnarok online? Hey, there we go. One. I guess I got to work on it. Anyways, so when I play on my phone and I make any payments, it's going through Apple. When I pay on my computer, it's going through alternative payment providers. And so I actually, they don't broadcast the incentive because it would make them non-compliant with Apple's T's and C's. But I do notice that when I make my alternative payment, I'm paying a little bit less for the same amount of like virtual currency, right? So as a player, I'm better off, and it's better for the developer. And to your question about if you see it as one payment or if you see it as two, I don't see that on the consumer end because I just see that I'm going down a different payment funnel, and I'm paying with my card, same in both places, and just one is a little bit better for me and a little bit better for the company. Great question though. And I think we're going to do a Q&A session, but before we get deeper into more questions, I just kind of want to wrap up with this with saying that being here as the global product lead for gaming for JP Morgan, I want to understand the best things that we can do, that I can do to make payments better for video games, for the players, for developers, for publishers, and even for like the supporting ecosystem, right? The platforms on which games are built, and the platforms supporting games. So I'm really eager to talk to all of you and really understand, from your perspective, what's working well, what could be improved, and hope to, make a positive impact. With that said, thank you. If you want to see Alan and my stuff, you can go to our LinkedIn. This is the QR code that'll take you to the developer API portal for our payments. And yeah, thank you very, very much. Yeah.
Cool. So I'm sure the audience, we have a lot of questions, so I figure we can have maybe 3 to 4 questions around there and just see how it goes. So I know we had a question here, right? No? No? Okay.
You can all paper, rock, scissors to see who gets to ask.
Quick question. So when building this out, I saw when you were showing to you, with the JavaScript, is it 3 different portions that you have to do? Like you're required to do the 1, 2, 3, or like, I don't remember exactly how I thought about it at first, but that's kind of what I want to know.
Yeah. So there are 3 separate APIs. So you would be implemented, because we don't have SDKs right now. It's coming soon to make your lives easier. But I've just showcased like the step-by-step. Like the first thing you want to do is going to call this fraud check API. So if that goes through green light, we can move on to payment verification. If that comes through like with the green light, then we're pretty okay to go on with the transaction. But again, we have another tool called tokenization, or not just our tool, but there's tools called tokenization that you can secure essentially the card number, scramble it, however you want. It's pretty much encrypting it, right? So then, again, you can also encrypt it on the front end as well, before the payment even goes through. Does that answer your question? So it is 3 separate APIs. There's going to be more validation APIs as well. So it's going to be you can kind of pick and choose what you want for your customers, your players.
Okay, so I guess that actually refreshed my memory of what I want to kind of know. If someone was to fail at one portion of implementing the 3 steps, what would happen, and who would kind of be responsible for that?
So you would get a response that's saying like, hey, this didn't pass, right? You're probably, if they failed the fraud check, you're probably going to get a decline that's represented by probably a D as a response, right? So then you handle that however you want for the experience. So it's going to see maybe.
Well, let's say they get an 8, but
Yeah.
I just say there is errors when someone's developing. They messed up in the middle, but then they have tokenization. Is there something to catch, like, hey, this second step is wrong, or I know it's new, but just do you know that as of
Yeah.
now?
I mean, then again, you just like cancel that transaction itself, right? I mean, it only makes sense if a validation doesn't go through, then just cancel the transaction. Maybe you try again.
Yeah, in your game's UI, you can basically take the request, right, and then you can have a UI element to tell the user, like, hey, like this payment failed, right?
Yep.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Over here.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. So one of the things that I noticed with the demonstration you were going through is that it looked, I'll say, similar to some other things like Stripe and some other third-party payment providers that I've used in the sense of like relatively simple API and stuff like that. What are some of the things that JP Morgan is offering that maybe is suggested to not use, like Stripe, for example?
So Stripe and the online payments API is like very similar in terms of just accepting the customers paying into it, right? So that in itself is like, you'd say a competitor. But the thing is, what's different about the JP Morgan entire payments ecosystem is just more about just the paying in portion. There's the treasury side of things, so like the paying out, and then as Ben mentioned as well, is the management also. So there's more and more APIs going to be coming out. There's a full end-to-end solution, right? Does that answer your question? Awesome.
Okay.
Hi. Okay. So I just had one question about. So Stripe and these other platforms you can use kind of as a service. If you want to use the same, if you want to access the JP Morgan stuff, does that mean opening an account through JP Morgan? And then if you do that, what are the resources for developer support?
Great question. Hit that link up. So essentially, it's going to be like your standard developer platform. All documentation is going to be available. You'll sample code. There's a GitHub with sample apps that you can play around with. This one that I just showcased is up on our GitHub as well. If you want to check that out, I can send that link to you later. And sign up is a breeze. Before this whole like payments developer portal, to even access products, you had to onboard as a client, like a full-on client, to even look at the product list and documentation, which sucks for developers, right? And that's why I didn't really even know JP Morgan had APIs till this, right? So sign up is a breeze. You can sign up with GitHub and play around with the sandbox. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, we got a couple.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could talk about your integration with Broadridge, or if you knew anything about it and the settlement of the coin.
I'm sorry, integration with who? I didn't hear that.
Broadridge.
Broadridge. So I can't speak to that up here, but integrations with that would be on the QR code here. I hate to punt to that, but I would check it out there.
Thanks.
Hi, Ben. I have two questions. So we came here because we noticed you mentioned about the DMA. So first, a question about the JP Morgan. Are you guys, back to the first few slides, are you guys a payment processor or merchant of record in this whole process?
Payment processor.
Okay. And so my second question is about the DMA, because we all know like the effective in March in Europe, European Union. So for the game developers, I'm just curious because like Apple Store, Google Play is still, if you introduce like third-party or third-party payments, they still charge 20% or 7%. Yeah. So what's the difference? What's the benefits to mobile developers? Would
Sure.
you mind to
Yeah.
give more insights?
Yeah, great question. So as of right now, with those fees, I mean, you'll be their fees for using the platform, even if you're using third-party payments, are still high enough that it makes using third-party payments not necessarily a whole lot cheaper than just using their native. Now, it does still help you unlock some of these other things. So some of the value further down the chain of how you move the money, with kind of the example I gave is one benefit. So while your payment fees may not necessarily be better when you think about the whole picture there, when you then look at the entire life cycle of your money and the speed to which you get access to it, what more you can do with it, and some of these ways I talked about offsetting the payment fees themselves, that's where you can get some of that benefit. And there's, it also remains to be seen. We're just now seeing the rollout of how these companies are responding to DMA, and with the current fees that are still in place, may not be the same. That may not be the same structure in several years as well. So looking forward, that may change too to make other payment options more competitive.
I see. Sorry, one more question. You also, you just mentioned another game you play. Sorry, I didn't play, I don't play that game, but also means like a JP Morgan payments also available for like a PC web game, right?
You could, yeah.
That's good to know. Thank you.
What's that?
It's just an API.
Yeah, just an API. So
Great. Thank you.
you bet.
Well, do we have one last question over here? Yeah?
I got 3 questions, one for Ben and 2 for Alan. Ben, you mentioned some obviously hypothetical interest rates. Are those hypothetical interest rates kind of fixed, or would they change based on some regulation?
I'm not sure what I can say about interest rates without a lawyer yelling at me, but my personal understanding, this is not on behalf of JP Morgan, is that as rates in the market fluctuate, so would rates on any of these interest-bearing accounts.
Oh, cool. Other 2 questions for Alan. 1, how ready is this development payment system for integration? Could I roll this out tomorrow into one of my games right now?
The onboarding process for new clients is still like in the works, but we have a sales guy here. This guy.
You and I need to have a chat, fella.
You should talk to that guy.
And then second question, on a more personal level, what's
Yeah.
it like hopping the borders from developer to developer advocate?
Can you say that again?
You were a developer before this, right?
Right,
So
yeah.
what's the interest in, or the difference rather, going from developer to developer advocate?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I started as DevRel, I started making like these how-to guides, right? And really just like becoming a product expert on whatever I'm working on, and then people like coming to me. I'm like the first line of defense, right? They're coming to me asking all these questions, and then if I can unblock them, that's a fantastic feeling for me. So like kind of like after the whole Twitter thing, I was like contemplating, should I go back to being a software engineer or just continue on this path as DevRel? And eventually I chose DevRel just because I love educating, I love unblocking folks. So